Okay, what's up, guys? Today we're going to break down a program, how you can make a program. So this can be used for football, it can be used for soccer, it can be used for any goddamn sport you're thinking of. Today, I think I just chose a random sport. I chose tennis. I don't play tennis, but I do know like the basic components. I know that it requires thoracic rotation as well as relationship with lumbopelvic rhythm. I know that we are going to have to swing, so an extension. Okay. Um, and then from then on, once you find your sport that you're creating a program for, like I said, it can be anything, it can be football, it can be tennis. Then from then on, we can create, right? The reason being that obviously it does matter what sport you're playing. It's going to have a huge impact towards like your power drills, your SAQ drills, whatnot. That's going to be vital. And so if I'm doing tennis or if I'm doing golf, that's going to matter because I'm going to have to adjust those things. However, like the main idea, the main components of making a program are very basic. They're gonna apply to every single sport you're doing, right? Like the ideas of how I'm implementing power, how I'm implementing strength, how I'm implementing hypertrophy are going to be the same. If your body isn't going to adjust itself towards that specific sport, it will, in a sense, like of how you're training for that sport. But the ideas, the main components, the main pillars of what make a sport-specific program are generally going to be the same. Okay? So, and that's where like the more like, depending on the sport, the more specific you'll be, which will then make the program more advanced. So I'm going to give kind of like a breakdown of what I personally think of when making a program, making a basic program. And then from then on, you can go on and make it more advanced by being more specific. Go on YouTube, find specific movements for this muscle group, for this sport in specific. That's how you can make a program from being basic or just being good to being like excellent, advanced. But you have to start from somewhere. You have to create a draft. So today we're going to learn how to create a draft so that, and how, like, what are the main components. And then from then on, you can make any program. You can make a any sports-specific program. Okay? So generally when I'm making a program, as you would assume, you're utilizing your body. So I like to break down the main components that are being used through that specific sport. The main muscle groups. So what are the main overactive, underactive muscles? Now, let's say you're playing a paraplegic sport. Legs is probably not going to be an issue when having to worry about making your program. Maybe you're going to focus more on your upper body. You know, you're playing paraplegic volleyball or basketball. But I generally like to take an account of, and so it's important to know your population. And so our population today is going to be a newbie lifter. That's going to matter, and I'll explain later. It's going to be a newbie lifter who tends to have the normal tendencies of your general population. So kyphosis, overactive anterior deltoids, whatnot. Okay, so the first thing we're making a program is thinking about your main population and so this is going to be a newbie lifter who has your main basic overactive, underactive tendencies. Okay. So from then on, you want to list your muscle groups. So you can go on Google, you can do this. Just you don't have to draw an image. This guy's pretty happy and ripped. He probably doesn't need my help. But you go on. The first thing, let's start off from the head all the way down to, I kind of cut off the feet, so you guys head to the gastrocnemius. But the first thing is trapezius. The trapezius in relationship with the anterior deltoids. Here, in relation to the anterior deltoids. And the upper lats tend to be overactive, especially when you have like a seat posture. If you're working in an office. Okay? The trapezius, anterior deltoids tend to be overactive. And so I'm going to write this down too, because this will be vital. When making your program, thinking about your population, what are the two things you want to think about? Well, you want to think about, like I said, the overactive, underactive muscles. Oh, what else? Well, you also want to think about what is a priority. What is a priority within your training? Because while a muscle group may be important, let's say that you're trying to make an aesthetic body, then your anterior deltoids, lateral deltoids, posterior deltoids are going to be vital. You want to emphasize that more than, let's say, your let's say more than your lower back, right? Maybe in a different sport, your lower back is vital, or in a sport, your lower back is vital. So you want to prioritize that as your first priority, maybe in comparison to your shoulders. I can't really think of any at the moment. But depending on the sport you're playing, you have different priorities. Doesn't mean that you don't hit all muscle groups. It just means one's more important than the other. And when something's a priority, that means you always implement it first. Okay? So, to make things easy for yourself, have a 1-2. What's the first priority? And then what's the second priority? What's the secondary? We're not going to have any that's not a priority. Even if something's overactive, that doesn't mean it's not weak, right? So let's say that you have kyphosis, you have an overactive anterior deltoid. It doesn't mean that you don't hit your anterior deltoids. Sure, it's overactive, but that doesn't mean it's strong. It just means that it's overutilized and it's not being facilitated with your posterior chain. Okay? So now that I'm done blabbering about that, trapezius. The trapezius tends to be overactive in comparison for the upper trapezius in comparison to the middle traps and the lower traps. Okay, so it's going to be a second priority. We also have the anterior deltoids and the upper lats. Right, the anterior deltoids are vital, but when thinking about the other shoulder muscles, thinking about the posterior deltoid, thinking about even your stabilizer muscles, thinking of your infraspinatus teres minor, your supraspinatus subscapularis muscle, your anterior deltoid is going to be a secondary option in comparison to that back. Okay, which brings me to my next thing. I broke it down very simplistically. Should be far more, but I put let's just dorsi. Really, we can just put this back. I know that we have traps in there, but back. Back is going to be a number one priority, right? Because we have this overactivity within our anterior side of our body. So the posterior chain, the serratus anterior, the stabilizer muscles are going to be vital for retracting that scapula, allowing for more stabilization within our core, and allow for more relationship with that lumbopelvic rotation. Okay. So that's going to be number one priority. Well, then going down here, going further, we have our adductors and adductors. Our adductors and our abductors are going to be vital for stabilization. They're also going to be very vital for lateral movement. Well, what do we know about the specific sport that we're doing today? Tennis. Tennis is going to be vital for lateral movement. It's going to need stabilization. If we have a lack of stabilization within our abductors and adductors, it's going to be a little wobbly. It's going to have an effect upon our kinetic chain movement. And all these muscles will. Don't get me wrong, all these muscles will. But I think of our abductors and adductors being a huge vital component that needs to be a number one priority within our program in comparison to, let's say, our upper traps. So it's going to be a number one muscle. Okay? Then we go on, we have our biceps. We have the short and long. The short head, the long head. Now our biceps are going to be vital as well, but are they as important as our opposed our triceps? I do not think so. The reason being, our triceps are going to be vital for extension. We need those triceps. So if I had to choose one over the other, I'm going to prioritize my triceps. Biceps. Okay, so now we fix this upper body. This guy slowly cancels out. Now we have our rectus abdominis, we have the transverse abdominis, we have the internal oblique, external oblique split. Okay? This is going to be a number one priority. Remember, our relationship with our pelvis and our upper body is going to be highly facilitated based on our abs, right? Our control, our stabilization, intra-abdominal pressure. We want to make sure that we utilize our sheath so that the translation from all the way from our feet all the way up to our body actually translates. If we have poor abdominal muscles, we have poor control, stabilization, even strength, then we're not going to have any sort of proper translation when going into that tennis swing. And in an effect, we're going to be inferior tennis players. The number one goal of our training, I am not a tennis coach. But I am a coach that's meant to help prepare your body so that when a tennis coach does train you on how your skills and whatnot, your strength, your mobility, your power is not going to be a limiting factor. What's going to be a limiting factor is you. So if you suck and you have a good body, and you just suck, not because of your body. So, but the abdominals can be vital. Okay? Then we go down to our pelvis and our legs. Well, to be honest, when it comes to any sport, But specifically, tennis, where rotation and that push off, we're going to jump and all that stuff, your quadriceps are going to be vital. Your quadriceps and your hamstrings and all your legs are going to be vital. I did, however, note that I have my quadriceps as number 1, my hamstrings is number 2. Well, why the fuck do you have that? Your hamstrings are vital for stabilization. Yes, I totally agree. However, with our quadriceps, I would just want to put a little bit more emphasis on it. Reason being is that we are having a lot of forward-backward movement. We are having a lot of lateral side to side. And while we need stabilization, we also need a lot of power within our quadriceps. Right? We want to have that rapid force development. We want to be as fast as possible, as quick as possible. So we want to increase our focus, and it's a horrible way of saying it, but have our ATP usage, motor unit improvement, being focused specifically on our quadriceps more than our hamstrings, because the hamstrings are just the stabilizers, right? When you're doing thinking about Olympic athletes, you're trying to focus on the stretch reflex, the rapid force development, all that stuff. They're trying to utilize the most amount of energy within their quadriceps while reducing the amount of energy that's being utilized for the hamstrings. So that's why I put hamstrings as number 2 and quadriceps number 1. And then we, of course, have our gluteus minimus. Gluteus minimus is what's going to facilitate internal rotation and that anterior pelvic tilt. And then we have our gluteus maximus, which is going to be vital for the posterior tilt and external rotation. Right? That's why when you have overactive, underactive muscles within your glutes, you tend to have lodorosis, pretty sure it's lodorosis, where you have that C-shaped posture where you have overactive gluteus maximus, you're squeezing tight in. You have underactive gluteus medius, you have nothing internally rotating in, and then from then on, your back's trying to facilitate it by going forward. Same thing here, if you have an overactive gluteus medius and underactive gluteus maximus, like I said, it doesn't mean it's strong, it's overactive. You have too much internal rotation. What happens when you internally rotate? We're going to push your glutes out, and this is going to cause this weird, I think this might be lodorosis. I know this is kyphosis, but then you gotta think about that. You got that wiggle basically. Okay. So your glutes are gonna be vital, and I put those 2 as number 1, because 1 being overactive compared to the other is gonna lead you down literally some crazy back pain. Okay. The next thing you need to take into account. Well, what is tennis consistent? And so, really, this is going to be with any sport. I put soccer, football, boxing, be the same. Strength, power are your 2 main focuses. Specifically, though, then you have to break that down even further. You got absolute strength, you got strength and endurance. Absolute strength, you more focused on the amount of force you produce within 1 rep, while your endurance is going to focus on hypertrophy, mechanical stress, metabolic stress. Or focus on also gaining. And you have power. Power is going to be vital. Force times velocity is going to be vital. Your speed and agility, quickness, right? Okay. So that doesn't really need much time to go over. But finding out your main components is also what I would suggest. Focus on your main components of the sport before you go into looking at the body, because that's going to help you realize what's most important to focus on. Okay. I know you guys probably can't see shit with this mirror. I do apologize, messing up. But the next thing, we got to figure out what type of periodization we're doing. Okay? Now, last time I checked, there's 3 types of periodizations. There's linear periodization, there's undulated periodization, there's block periodization. And so know before we go into this is that all these periodizations are going to be they're going to facilitate growth either way, right? People are like, oh, well, what's going to facilitate the most growth? If you're exerting a whole bunch of effort in, if you're having recovery, you're going to see results. And this is regarding anything with training. If you're getting enough sleep, if you're doing all these things, you're going to see results either way. It's only when you start reducing the amount of sleep, reducing your nutrition, reducing all these important aspects within your training, that you're going to see subpar results. And then some people put a blame on that on their program, and it's like, well, maybe I gotta do block periodization, maybe I gotta do linear periodization, maybe I gotta focus more on this. Well, maybe you just gotta friggin' 1, stay more consistent, and 2, be more be more, think about the surrounding components of what is supporting your training, right? So the reason why I'm saying this before I'm going on into breaking this down is because a lot of people will have an opinion upon what's the best training style, push-pull legs, upper body, lower body, you know, linear periodization, block periodization. And I'm telling you that it doesn't freaking matter if you're not actually, one, being long-term focused or being consistent, and two, you're not taking care of nutrition diets. But if you have all those three things down, then we'll break this down as what it is. So there's, like I said, there's linear, block, undulated. These tend to be the most popular foods. Okay, I'll try to break it down as best I can because it can be kind of wacky. Linear. So I have a personal favorite, and I'll break it down in a second. But linear is quite literally, you're literally following a straight line. And to create unbiased, we're going to say the results are going to be all the same for all three periodizations. Now, you can argue one's better than the other, but generally, like I said, you don't really have to spend much time on this unless like you're really like a powerlifting coach. But if you're, and so, yeah. So linear, let's say you have push-pull legs. This is where like push-pull legs are being counted. This is where your upper body, lower body days. You're going to, let's say you have a 4-month period. And so let's put a 4-month period for all these. The only thing with linear periodization, at its simplistic form, is that linear periodization focuses on a specific thing for those full 4 months. So if I'm doing push-pull legs, I'm doing push-pull legs throughout these full 4 months. And so quite literally my results are, the foundation is staying the same, and my results should be linear. They should be consistent, especially if I'm new. Okay? You're not really changing much, so you're not going to really see much of a drastic change within a specific thing. So you're not creating a niche. But this, and we'll go down here, the pros is that it's very consistent. It's very consistent. What else? What else? I don't even know if you can see this. My screen is quite literally red, so I can't really see much. It's consistent. It's honestly, I think, in my opinion, linear is the best for like newbies. People that are very, because you can kind of create a foundation. You don't have one niche. What else? It's overall a well-balanced structure, well-balanced. So it's, I'd say low risk, and even though you're getting a high reward, I'd say low reward, because I'm going to compare it to the other two. Yeah, what are the cons? Well, the cons is, it says low risk, so you're not really, the rewards aren't, you're not having a specific, I can't speak while writing. You're not having a specific muscle group or something that's popping off stuff. Well, another con is that maybe too simplistic. And last and finally, if I can point it down to one thing that I have a problem with linear periodization, is not great for sport-specific training. So, in my opinion, if you're doing sport-specific training, linear periodization for a short period of time is great. If we're thinking about like macro cycles for long-term yearly training, I wouldn't suggest doing linear periodization. Not great for sports. Now, like I said, that's a very controversial but broad statement that doesn't break it down to its core enough. It is a great way of training that can be utilized for a specific time period. But if we're thinking about macro cycles where over the long term, I don't want to stick to linear periodization for throughout, let's say, 6 months or 6 months of training, and limit how much potential growth I could be getting from power and strength. Which will go into the next thing. What is block periodization? Well, block periodization is quite literally, as you summarize it. We have these 4 months, and within these 4 months, you have kind of literally a niche. This is really, block periodization, I can put in a nutshell, is niche specific. Very niche specific. So what the hell does that mean? Well, let's say that a great way I can do is, if I'm doing a powerlifting meet, then I have a squat, bench, deadlift. Maybe my first month, I have a huge emphasis on the squats. Well, and then my second month, I had a huge emphasis on the bench. My third month, I had a huge emphasis on the deadlift. And so we've all aligned. It's like it follows a line, but it has specific niches that kind of goes here, goes here, goes here. And to be unbiased, it has the same results, just linear, but it's a specific niche. Right? So 1 month focus on one thing, the second month focus on another thing. Can you see that? Yeah. And so what can be the problem with that? Oh, going back down here. Well, same thing with the pros as the problem with that is that it's niche specific. So you can lack. So let's actually go to the program. It's great for specificity. Whatever. Specificity. Okay. But the con is that it can be too specific. However, a pro with this is that since it's super specific, you can prioritize specific muscle groups as well as specific movements that maybe is lacking. Well, what's a con with this? Well, this could, as a result, if you're focusing on your squat 1 month and then you go into your bench, maybe your squat deteriorates because you're focusing on your bench so much the second month. Right? So there's as a result, you can kind of have a deterioration of results. Okay? You have a deterioration of results. So then we'll go into undulated periodization. This is my dog. Think of undulated periodization as someone that just constantly keeps changing their mind over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, he does great. With undulated periodization, the best way to represent it is like this. Undulated periodization utilizes all sorts of movements as well as strength, power, hypertrophy in order for you to get your goal. So with block periodization, let's say they have 1 month where they focus on strength, 1 month where they focus on power, 1 month where they focus on hypertrophy. Linear periodization focuses more on the microcycle kind of aspects where it's push, pull legs, push, pull legs, push, pull legs. Undulated periodization utilizes all of that. Utilizes power as well as strength as well as absolute strength as well as endurance as well as SAQ drills into multiple different cycles, but then you break those cycles down even further so that you can be more specific. So I know that was kind of a mixed idea, but let's say we have strength and power. Let's be simple. You have strength and power. Well, with undulated periodization, maybe I'll have a month. So this is 4 months, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. I might have maybe strength as a priority. So I'll do strength, but then I also include power. Do strength, but also include power, and then maybe within the third day of the 1 week of that month, then I'll just do strength. And we'll be able to break it down a lot further because that's what we're doing today, undulated periodization. My favorite. But it utilizes all components and is far more specific upon what you need to do in order for you to get basically the most amount of bang for your buck. Okay? So just if you think of undulated periodization, it requires everything, it uses everything, but puts everything in a different sequence depending on where you're at within your season or within your training program. So what are the pros and cons? Pros. It's specific. You have to be very specific. But that's also what leads to a con. It can be too specific. Not too specific, but you have to be too specific. Because, for example, let's say that since you add strength, hypertrophy, and power, well, we know that hypertrophy requires stress. What if you stress the body too much? Well, that can have then a detrimental effect upon your strength and power. So you have to be so specific to the point that it doesn't cause a hindrance within your results. Because if you're not specific enough, let's say I'm like, I'll just hit power today, even though it's a strength day. And then you replace strength with power, or you replace hypertrophy with strength, your results are going to be skewed and then you're fucked, right? So there's a possible lack. So you have to have consistency but you have to be, you have to be consistent with all these programs, but you have to be even more specific. You have to be more attentive to detail. This is where I even have to say you have to like jot notes. Because let's say that, for example, you start plateauing. Well, then that's where undulated periodization is both great and also has a need to require training as well as like guidance, right? Because let's say that you're stuck on a bench and you most stuck on you're plateauing on the bench, and as a result, it's because of you're trained too hard on your hypertrophy domain. Well, you need to be able to take into account if you have in your notes or something like that to be like, oh, wait a second. Now I'm looking at it. Let's remove some volume from my hypertrophy day and see if my power, as a result, increases. And it might increase. And then you know that with undulated periodization that you need to reduce your hypertrophy. So you have to be far more specific. There's a higher risk, higher reward. But there's a pro. It's a higher risk and higher reward because you're going to make hiccups along the way. You're going to train too hard on one day compared to the other until you get to that point where you just know your body to a point where it's like, okay, as you're training, you're like, I'm pushing too hard. Right? So undulated periodization is, in my opinion, the best way to train. If you're more advanced, if you know what you're doing, if you're a newbie, unless you have a trainer guiding you, I wouldn't suggest undulated periodization. I'd stick with linear. I really just stick with linear. And if anything, go to block. Okay? So, then we're going to go upon the next thing. Well, let's go upon the main components. What are the main components of our training style for the undulated periodization? It's going to be power, absolute strength, and strength endurance. We're going to break those down a little further, right? I kind of did earlier. But power is going to be your force times the velocity. Your absolute strength is going to be focused on force. So you can stop at a point within your a pause bench, and then you go maximum force. This is where you're gonna have your 1 max, so 1 RM, and then you have strength endurance, which is going to consist of more hypertrophy training. What does hypertrophy mean? Well, really, if you break it down to its core, it's stress. And if we have stress, well, what types of stress are there? The main two ones I can think of, if there is any more, I don't know. Mechanical stress. Mechanical stress comes from focusing more on the eccentric. Doesn't mean that you don't focus on concentric, but it's based on just mechanical tension as well as the amount of sheer damage that you can cause to the muscles. Mechanical stress on its emphasis on eccentric is going to be vital. And this is what we're going to focus on another day. You definitely don't need a 2 to 3 second eccentric. This would be great for mobility or stabilization, but all you really need out of the eccentric in relationship with the concentric is control. However, then we have metabolic stress. Metabolic stress. We'll go on that a different day because you always hear people evoking about the eccentric, but in my opinion, I'm going to a little rant for a second. In my opinion, if you focus too much on the eccentric, I used to do that as well, where you do 2, 3 seconds, even 4 or 5 seconds of slow eccentric, really getting that mechanical stress. Yes. Do you get more mechanical stress? Yes. But how does that affect maybe in your workout down the line, right? Let's say that my first exercise is bicep curls, and I go to failure to the point my biceps are absolutely cooked, right? But then you could argue that then my next couple of sets are going to be inferior to my first set. And so you might respond and say, well, that's a good thing, right? I want my body to be stressed. But there is also, remember, when you do mechanical stress, you got to think about a couple of things. You got to think about not only the stress aspect of it, but how much load, because mechanical stress is also facilitated by how much load is causing specifically with our cells. We have the extracellular matrix, and it consists of extracellular matrix, fibrin, we have collagen, we have these signaling that is caused by the stress. Right, so while your first set, while it required signaling of mTOR and other pro-hypertrophic signaling pathways, this could reduce the amount of performance that can go within the rest of the workout, and then cause us to, while at the beginning have a very high spike, towards the end really dim down low. Where in comparison to let's say that you're not milking the eccentric too much and you're allowing yourself for more rest periods, then over time you're able to while at the beginning it might be more a dimmer spike, you're able to stay consistent, in which you can argue over time might be more beneficial than killing yourself with slow eccentrics and all that stuff. So all the people that are saying like, oh, mechanical eccentric, milking the eccentric is great, you could argue that long term it has a less of a beneficial effect on how much weight you can lift, whatnot, which could then, how much weight you can lift also does have an effect upon how much stress you're able to bring to the body. And like I said, we can go with that another day. But okay, then we have metabolic stress. Metabolic stress is, at a simplistic form, is metabolite buildup, specifically brought through glycolysis and all this stuff. Catabolic and anabolic pathways will make excess metabolites. And so, as we work out, metabolic stress is induced specifically through like that HIIT style training. That HIIT style training where you're reducing the amount of stress you have, or reducing the amount of rest you have in your body, and increasing the amount of stress within short periods of time, requiring, in this case, your body, what happens is the cells start swelling. And this is because there's metabolite buildup within these cells. It's through the process of osmosis. And as a result, we have what's called the same thing. You're having the breakage of this extracellular matrix, of the cytoskeleton of the cells. And as a result, you're inducing growth, which, like I said, we can go on another day. Partly because my mouth is drying up right now, and I don't think I can go any longer. But mechanical stress and metabolic stress are two ways of stress that we think about when it comes to strength endurance. Okay? So now that we have these in mind, we have one more thing when taking into account of our training style before we go on to actually making the program. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, the last thing. How does the facilitation of actual contraction actually work? Well, remember, everything roots from our central nervous system. What does that mean? Well, we have our brain, and we have our spinal cord that goes along down the vertebrae. Okay, I'm gonna bring my picture justice because I spent like a minute on it. We have our brain, right? It goes down via our spinal cord and sends signals to basically our muscles in order for us to contract. Well, what does that mean? Like, how can we translate that into more specific terms? I don't even know if you get it. Yeah. Well, that might be yours, and whatever. Well, as we send signals to our brain to contract, right? All contractions occur that root from the brain. That's why, like, you're paraplegic. It's because of a lack of connection within your nerves, whatnot. So your nerves consist of nerve fibers. Fibers consist of neurotransmitters, whatnot. Okay. Basically, in its most simplistic form, we have what's called neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters. Well, why in the hell do I care about neurotransmitters? Well, because neurotransmitters are what's going to send signals from neurons. So you have neurons. We have neurons that have these neurotransmitters. Okay, so we have what's called, think of this as two separate neurons, right? We have two separate neurons. And then we have these neurotransmitters that meet up when these neurons clash, and they send what's called vesicles. And through the facilitation of action potentials, through the facilitation of the potassium-sodium gradient, as well as what's called this process of calcium influx, which is the process of calcium going within the vesicles, causing what we have this. I think it's. Yeah. So we have these. Let me rephrase that. We have these neurons, then we have these vesicles, which then facilitate neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters. I really hope I'm not mixing this up. Sometimes you mix up the neurotransmitters, neurons, whatever. But we have these neurotransmitters from the vesicles. These are, think of it as sacs that can contain these neurotransmitters that go on to the opposing neuron, in this case, or like the cell, and the muscle cell. And these neurotransmitters, in this case, acetylcholine, as you would notice, acetylcholine is used throughout the body for contraction. This could be even for like urination. We have acetylcholine that goes throughout our brain to send signaling specifically to the bulbous muscles, I'm pretty sure, which facilitate the squeeze. I think it's we have our kidneys, ureters that lead to urethra. But we have external, internal sphincters, and the external sphincters get squeezed by I'm getting off topic, but by the bulbal urethral gland. But basically, the acetylcholine is what's going to facilitate this contraction. And so, what's cool about myosin and actin, I'm going to turn on this mic here. What's cool about myosin and actin is myosin and actin are stagnant until they're not. They're stagnant until they're not. Once they get excited by acetylcholine, what happens? They go through contraction, and myosin and actin, well, as I mentioned, they contract. And this is what this facilitates the movement of our workouts. So why am I breaking this down? Well, the reason I'm breaking this down is because where does this all stem from? This stems from the brain. And why the hell does that matter? Well, because contraction takes effort. And that's going to go into our next thing. It's like taking you along a journey right now. Contraction takes effort. So when we're making a program, we got to think about a couple things. Let's jot down. Let's jot down. For strength and endurance, I'm gonna replace it with hypertrophy. Okay. When we're making a program, and you hear this a lot, they always say like powers first. And our program's gonna be a little different. There's a reason being for that, and I'll explain in a second. The reason they say that though is because, as we went down earlier, power consists of force x velocity. Compared to hypertrophy and absolute strength, it requires the most amount of neural freshness, referring to the brain. It requires more neural freshness in order for us to facilitate optimal 100% power. Now, let's say focus on power and absolute strength first, or focus, let's say I want to improve on absolute strength, and I put absolute strength first. Yes. But when we're doing undulated periodization that requires all power, hypertrophy, and absolute strength, power should be the number one priority because it requires more freshness in comparison to strength. And then hypertrophy, it requires, while of course, like with all these movements, requires neural freshness. Hypertrophy is more being emphasis upon stress, mechanical stress and metabolic stress. So as a result, since necessarily that how much weight you're lifting for hypertrophy isn't a priority, that should be last. So we have power, which should be first. We have strength, which should be second. Remember, we have power, which is force x velocity, while strength is more of just force, right? You can do like a pause bench where you push it up and you're just focusing on force. Velocity is that stretch reflex, so eccentric, concentric. And so when we know what the eccentric and concentric, we have interneurons, we have alpha motor neurons, which require a lot of neurostimulation. While in absolute strength, since this requires a little less, it should be a second priority to have. And then we have hypertrophy, which should be third, because it just requires more stress. Okay? And so we're almost done here. Now we're going to break down a little program I made, and we're going to just break down a day of phase. We're not going to break down, because it's going to be a 3-day program, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 16 weeks, and it's going to be targeted towards a newbie. Okay? Okay, I'm actually going to, I'll be right back. This should be better. Okay. It's still bad. Whatever. With our 3-day program, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's a newbie. Our first phase is going to consist of mobility. Well, you're explaining about power, how we do mobility first. So with a newbie especially, they're going to have a lot of overactive, underactive muscles. So we want to reassure them, we want to reassure ourselves that we're facilitating the best results as we progress our program. Right? Because if I do a power phase, if I do a strength phase, and I'm overactive in the anterior deltoids, I'm going to, one, limit not only my range of motion, I'm going to limit my mobility. As a result, I'm going to get subpar results. I'm going to increase that overactivity. So it's going to be vital that I prioritize mobility as a number one priority. Okay? And we'll go through exercises as well. Let's break down the phases. Or let's go down the exercises. Why not? Okay? So mobility, it's going to consist of, I like to start from the bottom up because we don't know who this population is. It's better to be more safe than sorry. We have like an ankle dorsiflexion band. Dorsiflexion will be vital for when we go down to that squat. World's greatest stretch. It's going to require a lot of thoracic rotation as well as a stretch within the serratus anterior. You have the lateral glute side to side. Alright, so this part of the warm-up. Lateral glute side to side is going to be vital for activating gluteus medius because generally for most people, either whether in there is too much of extension or flexion causing posterior deltoid or posterior tilt or anterior tilt, the gluteus medius tends to be very overfull, underactive for most people. Squatted YTW is just going to facilitate a lot of the serratus anterior as well as your teres minor and in specific your infraspinatus. We have planks that have a lot of stabilization, building intra-abdominal pressure within our rectus abdominis. And then we have the half kneeling cable chops. It's going to be vital in preparing our body for the concentric and eccentric control that is used with weight for rotation. And then we have the serratus wall slide. It's going to help with our serratus anterior as well. But it's going to be really specific on protraction and retraction. Okay? Damn, I just got a marker. I just got my shoes marked in. Okay. Next thing, we have our uncontrolled workout. We have single leg hip thrusts. Single leg hip thrust can help with control within our glutes as well as facilitating glute max activation. We have a lat pull down. We're going to go down this really fast because you can make your own program based on the simple movements, right? Lat pull down, dumbbell chest press, reverse lunge, 90-degree external rotation, tricep push down, farmer carries, split squats, wrist flexion. And so when making these exercises, I took into account, one, the movement, where it facilitates a lot of stabilization within our stabilized muscles, posterior chain, as well as being more beginner-friendly. But if you take anything into account, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing our type 1 muscle fibers, as well as it consisting more 10 to 12 reps. Now, can you do 15, can you do 20, can you do 30? Yes. Right? Is there science that proves that the reps don't matter? Yes. It really matters based on how hard you're pushing yourself. But 10 to 12 reps tends to be a pretty good range. Anything lower than that, we'll focus more on type 2 muscle fibers, focus more on stress of power and strength. Type 2 muscle fibers are going to be more of your stabilized muscles, right? So higher reps, you don't really need to go to failure in the mobility phase. Really just facilitating more stabilization and control. Okay? Then you're going to your phase 2, it's hypertrophy. The reason why hypertrophy is my second phase, and this is going to consist of 6 weeks, is because I do believe that with more growth, you do have more motor unit improvement. Now, does more muscles mean necessarily more strength? No. You see really small people with a lot of strength as well as really big people that are weak as fuck. The whole emphasis, though, on hypertrophy is one, to help bring that reciprocal inhibition, so control the eccentric in relationship with the concentric, because hypertrophy does melt the eccentric more in comparison to the strength power phases. I also like it because it's a really great step up for a newbie lifter to see results. Right? They're seeing their body actually physically change in comparison to strength and power. And like I said, muscle mass does have a relationship to motor unit improvement to an extent. So I think that as we progress to our strength and power phase, before you get a hypertrophy phase, preparing our body for stabilization, neuromuscular control. Right, so we have the lat stretch. These are warm-ups, lat stretch, 90 hip rotations, band and W's, Pallof press, plank. Then we go on to, and I do like to add a little bit of sport-specific movements, even within my hypertrophy phase. So we've got lateral deceleration drill. We've got the banded overhead press with the plate squat. That's simply doing like an overhead press. We have like a little machine that allows you to go into kind of like an overhead press squat. Let's go down with control. You got decline push-ups, lat pull down, hip thrust, so it's very similar to the mobility phase, except there are like kind of more hypertrophic exercises, such as like the deficit push-up, or allows you to get more of a deep stretch. Okay. Next thing, phase 3. Phase 3 is going to consist of strength. Okay. This is where you have and so with hypertrophy, same thing. I want to say 10, 12 reps, 8 to 12 reps. You can even do 5 reps. It doesn't really matter. This is where, though, since you are focusing on mechanical stress, metabolic stress, or kind of what style of training you're facilitating, you want to go 2 reps of this value. Strength, the next phase. Most of them guys, strength will consist of your warm up. Kind of gave up there right now, but then you have your this is where you have your more compound movements. So you have your barbells back squats, your front squats, your barbell back squats, really good for posterior chain activation. Front squats, really good for same thing, posterior chain activation, but control and extension. You got your Bulgarian split squats, a little bit more utilization of unilateral movement. You got your Cossack squat, really good for the lateral movement, which would be vital for tennis. So you see with strength here that it's far more simplistic. And so the reps are going to be around 4 to 6. And RPE level should generally be, the first exercise should be maybe like RPE 8. And then from then on, you're going to go with maybe like RPE 7, RPE 6. Your fatigue ratio to, your fatigue should be very low. Okay? The last phase. And this is the most important phase for every sub-training, is your power phase. Your power phase, which consists of movements, are very similar to that sport. This is where you got to know and write down what sport you're doing. For tennis, I have box jumps, broad jumps, lateral bounded stick, medicine ball rotation scoop. You got suicides. You're going back, forth, up, down. A lot of movement that is utilized in the sport of tennis. And then you have a little bit of strength, and you have a little bit of hypertrophy. But you're making sure that these are going to be within 3 to 5 reps. That same thing, fatigue ratio. Fatigue is low. So with strength and power, if you get anything lower reps, fatigue is low, and more of a priority on that movement. Except with power, the only difference, though, is that exertion of both the eccentric and concentric really fast. So I'm going very fast. In comparison to the phase 3 of the strength, it's going to focus more on really just strong concentric. Okay? And I'll bring you over here, like as if you're a student that did something bad. Overall, anything. Why did I split it up into having mobility, hypertrophy, then having strength and power? Why did I have power first? Well, the reason being is that if we're a newbie lifter, the chances of us optimizing that power phase is going to be very low. Second thing, you can program however you want. So you can even have your power phase first. I'm not saying you don't, but you got to know your population. So not only is a newbie lifter not going to be able to facilitate a power program for power phase first optimally, but also that it's going to be very difficult to injure yourself your first year lifting, and even your year. So the reason why people will say their power phase lasts is generally because they're as they're approaching a season, they don't want to cause an injury. So if you're confident in how you train, or if you're confident in the sense that if you're confident you're going to injure yourself for a season, you're not reckless, having a power phase before your training style, before your season is great. It allows you to emit the most amount of force and control and sport-specific movements before you get into that season. However, it's important to have a taper. It's important to have a taper as you progress on. generally like 1 week, 2 weeks before you go into that season. Second thing, you might also want to put power first if you're an older lifter or like a strength athlete. If you're like playing football, tennis, it doesn't matter, any sport, but your priority is improving power. It is improving strength, but maintaining it. There's really no reason to even add up on that and increase your risk of injury, putting it before the season, right before the season. Instead, putting it in between the season where in case you do injure yourself, you are older, you are more higher risk of injury, as well as your priority really just being maintaining. You can put your power first and then go on with your hypertrophy being last, being more focused on stabilization and control. Okay? Like I said, a lot of programming has a lot of specificity on the population you're training with. Whatnot. However, breaking it down to its main core, going on to doing an anatomy check of what's your most important, what's the least important, going on to figuring out what periodization you're going to do. Making the actual program is very simple, right? I can figure out, I want to add a squat because I want to focus more on internal rotation, or I want to add a Bulgarian split squat in comparison to maybe normal squat because I want to focus on unilateral movement, internal rotation in comparison to a squat, So figuring out your priorities and building up from there, it's going to be very easy to make any program, any strength program. Okay? So that was all in one take. I was freaking fried, but hopefully the main components of understanding of how to make a program is there and you enjoyed. Adios.